What is happening, everyone? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast. My name is Tony Mazur. Thank you for listening to this on the podcatchers, I believe they call them, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and wherever you found this online somewhere. And thank you for watching on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. And I have a Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. Enough about me. That's just my plugs. I want to plug this guy right here, and that is my guest, Mark Mal. Well, excuse me. I let me rephrase that here. I would like to plug his product. Let me rephrase that too. Let me talk about his book and his what he has going on. And that is my guest, Mark Malkoff, and he has a book that's out now. It's called Love Johnny Carson, and I got in touch with Mark recently, but I've been aware of him for the last couple of years, being in the Gilbert Godfrey Listeners Association Facebook group, and also, and didn't realize that sometimes I would find people that I recognized that I just didn't see their name, but they would post in the group, and I had been hip to his former podcast, the Carson podcast, which unfortunately doesn't exist. But one thing about doing a Johnny Carson podcast about a figure who's been dead for 20 years is that you can go back in the archive and everything is pretty evergreen. It's not like you're going to listen to this and say, well, that's outdated. Well, I mean, technically all of it's outdated, but it's also not outdated. So you go back in the archive, but I really do want people to go out and purchase this book. It's out now. Love Johnny Carson, one obsessive fan's journey to find the genius behind the legend. And my guest, Mark Malkoff, the author of that, is on my podcast. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Tony, it's good to see you. Thank you for asking me to do this. I appreciate it.
So give a little bit about your background. I know I showed the Carson podcast that you used to do, but what are your credentials that you got a chance to get in the business of all things Johnny Carson, who, by the way, would have been 100 this past week.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, time flies. The show's been off the air for over 30 years. My dad got me into classic comedy when I was a kid. I was, 5 or 6 watching It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. So I knew who Jonathan Winters was. I knew who Everett, like Sid Caesar, and who Johnny Carson was. I knew who, obviously, like Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, more like the people I would go to see the movies. But my dad got me into classic comedy, and Johnny Carson was just like this party, and then could stay up late sometimes on a Friday or the anniversary primetime shows on VHS. I would just devour, and there was just something so likable about Carson's show. And he could be with the animals, he could be talking to kids, he could be talking with a farmer, he could be talking to an A-list movie star, and there was just something magical about that world. But I had just had so many questions. Like, to me, there's no difference between me watching David Copperfield's special when I was a kid and being like, how did they do that? Versus like watching Carson and be like, who's holding the curtain open up for Johnny behind there? What's going on? And like, I tracked him down and I talked to Irving Davis about what that was like. My dad explained that because people would be so funny on TV that during the interviews, and dad would shocked me, he said that they agree what they're going to talk about beforehand. They have somebody at the talent coordinators, and I was like, I have to talk to these people. How did they get their jobs? How did they put these things together? So it was all a giant mystery to me with Carson, and it never left. It's when he retired in May of '92. I just had more questions. So I can't believe, Tony, I've talked to over 400 people. I mean, it's unbelievable with this book. I mean, people that worked on the show, people that were guests, Carson's friends. It's I did not foresee this, but I got my questions answered, almost all of them, I'd say.
So let's get into who Johnny Carson was first, because people who grew up watching him, and I'll be honest, I was 4 by the time he was off the air. But the fact that I'm talking to you and that I have a knack for liking old Hollywood, he was Hollywood. He was the go-to person that you wanted to get called to the couch, you wanted to get the thumbs up or the okay, and that was going to make or break your career. Some people had very good careers but didn't get called to the couch, like George Wallace. Others got called to the couch and talked and sat on panel, but then didn't really do too much after that. So it kind of depended on the whole process. But from what I have heard from people who've been on the show as a guest, that Johnny Carson would be, laughing at Jonathan Winters or Don Rickles or Dean Martin on the show. And as soon as they were breaking for commercial, he shut down. That he wasn't the same Johnny Carson, that within seconds he came down and became very, very distant. Is that true?
He was saving his energy and he didn't want to ruin anything on air. He didn't really interact with people before the show like Jay Leno would go around and say hi to everybody. No, Johnny wanted it to be, and Letterman took the same note to keep it fresh on air. And if you're talking during the commercial, there could be really good stuff that just keep everything for air. And the guy, Johnny, originally was doing an hour and 45 minutes. Then he was did 90 minutes, and I mean he's just exhausted. Especially the show went down to he was doing the show 3 times a week just because he just didn't have the energy anymore. And a lot of it is just pacing. Like I've talked to certain people that just told me it was just the most exhausting thing. One of his competitors said it was like shoveling snow for 8 hours. Nobody knows. Gary Shandling said no one knows how exhausting this is. So that's part of it. But I do want to point out only 15 people, to my knowledge, have ever something like that have ever were ever called over in 30 years. I mean, it was ultra rare that that happened, and certainly like Jerry Seinfeld and Leno were not called over. I mean, most people were not called over. There's just the timing and just yeah, there's various reasons for that, but yeah, in terms of Johnny being a different person during the commercials, that's absolutely true. He'd just be smoking and just looking at his notes and kind of saving it.
So he was originally from Iowa. And how do you get a guy that is just this kid from Iowa, then start doing game shows? And how did he end up becoming this force? Because the Tonight
Yeah.
Show, for people who know, was around before Steve Allen, Jack Parr. But why was Johnny Carson's version of the Tonight Show? What was it about maybe his personality that he appealed to that middle America flyover country feel? What was it that was different from somebody like Steve Allen, who was also very talented, very musically gifted as well, and Jack Parr had a knack for hosting shows? What was it that made Johnny Carson, I guess, Johnny Carson?
I mean, he's born in Corning, Iowa. He's in Avoca, Iowa till he's like first or second grade and moves to Nebraska. And by the time he took over the Tonight Show when he was 36, and he tried to turn it down so many times, he just didn't think anybody could replace Jack Parr, was the biggest thing in TV. He had already had his whole, Malcolm Gladwell, like 10,000 hours of practice. I mean, he'd been performing since he was 14 years old. By the time he took the Tonight Show, so he had been a game show host for on ABC for 4 or 5 years. Who Do You Trust? He had a primetime failed show. On CBS called the Johnny Carson Show. We had a local shows in LA, Los Angeles, and Nebraska. But I think he knew what his strengths were, and he was just so likable. He loved comedy, and he just really thought, I don't want to do what Jack Parr is, which was controversy for the sake of controversy. I mean, Parr, there was a little bit of professional wrestling going on with Parr picking feuds with Ed Sullivan and certain people, and that definitely was him, but he definitely was some of the controversy was manufactured. And Carson just thought it should be an entertainment show. He's like, I don't understand. This I guess this worked for Jack for 4 or 5 years, but he just was convinced that this was the formula. And of course, people do not like new things. Like when Conan O'Brien started in September of '93, the critics were, oh my goodness, at the people they couldn't fill 199 seats for the taping in New York in 6A. So in the beginning, people are like, we miss Parr. Carson's show is so bland and boring compared to the manufacturer, the controversy, and it takes everybody a while. Like Stephen Colbert, his first year was number 3 in the ratings, and they just it just takes time to figure that out and for audiences to adjust. I mean, this was a game show host, and he was just really really funny, really talented, and it just worked out. And they never thought that these jobs were only supposed to be for maybe 5 years, 4 years. Steve Allen, 4 or 5 years, Jack Parr. So like in terms of going 30 years, like that was unheard of. That's not how those jobs were designed back then. And Carson just took the whole thing to a different level.
So, I mean, that really was a strength because you see a lot of the game show hosts of the time that they wanted to do something else. That, for example, John Davidson was I'm a songwriter, I'm a musician. I just do a game show. But then everyone goes, oh, you're the game show host. And it was kind of resentful for a lot of them. But but Johnny Carson seemed to really get comfortable of being the host there and being in front of the camera. And I like you said that when they started the Tonight Show, which was in New York at the time for the first what 10 years
Hmm.
was in New York before they
Yeah,
moved
with
out
Johnny.
to
Yeah.
beautiful downtown Burbank.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what do you talk about for an hour and 45 minutes on a show like that because you and I were kind of raised with that. The show is an hour. Other than Saturday
Yeah.
Night Live, which is an hour and a half, but it's an hour. The format was basically created by Johnny Carson of having the two guests, the comedian, the musical act, the monologue, everything like that. I can't imagine what you're going to talk about for double that time.
Yeah, he was exhausted. He would always have the last slot would be the author slot. And he would have to do two monologues. He'd have to do a monologue from 11:15 to 11:30 that only went to like half the country affiliates, and then he had to do a separate monologue for the whole country at 11:30. So like, that was for the first like 4 years or so, and he was just exhausted. But then you would have music, comedy, and actor and variety, but usually it would be an author. It's interesting. Like he had a lot of serious guests on in New York. I mean, he was definitely like some controversial people that would come on b with books that were, I mean, he had like, let's see, he had Madeline Murray O'Hare, which was the famous atheist who she was dubbed, I think, the most hated woman in America. You had the president of the Church of Satan, head of the NRA. Jim Garrison, who was one of the first people with John Kennedy with the charge that there was a conspiracy with his death, and so they definitely went to serious subjects just because they had so much time to fill. And Carson wasn't afraid of controversy if it happened organically, and it did occasionally here and there. But with Jim Garrison, it did. But overall, it's just entertainment show, and people are going to sleep with this show. There was a time when this gentleman in Burbank, Billy Preston, who was actually the first music number ever on Saturday Night Live, was Billy Preston. He's an
Nothing from nothing gives
unbelievable.
nothing.
Yes. So he got a standing ovation for a music act in Burbank, which had never happened before. And you would think that this would be exactly what his standing ovation and the audience is all standing during the music, which just doesn't happen. And you would think this would be a good thing, but Carson would never let him on again with him because he said, "My audience is going to sleep. We cannot have anything to that over the top. That's not what we do." Occasionally, he would break that rule if it was somebody iconic or if it was somebody, like James Brown or somebody like that. But Billy Preston at that point, and was not the biggest name at that point. So he would definitely break the rule occasionally if it's Chuck Berry, for example, in the 80s. But for the most part, he people were going to sleep. He knew that, and he just wanted to entertain people and just not have things that were just too over the top and loud.
When could you pinpoint a year when the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson hit its stride?
I think that the 70s are probably like the strongest work that he did. I would say maybe like late New York. I mean, by the time the first 2 years of the Tonight Show, I think that NBC gave him 26 weeks guaranteed. That was the whole thing. And there was definitely a lot of stuff within the press that they wanted Jack Parr back at NBC. And then 1964, that's when he started his Las Vegas. He performed there for a long time at the Sahara Hotel and was setting records, broke Judy Garland's record, and I feel like that was maybe the milestone where he was getting over with the public and people were finally getting used to him and all of that. But I feel like they brought in another producer who had him do a lot of demonstrations, which, he would have, like it would be everyone from a yoga teacher to somebody teaching him CPR to him, Carson donating blood during a blood shortage. And he was really good with people that weren't famous. And they did a lot more of those. And I feel
Yeah,
like
the
that
San
those,
Diego Zoo.
yes. Joan Emmerich came in during a Burbank trip in 1970. They were still in New York, but they had gone to Burbank for a couple weeks. And Emmerich came in. Joan, she was 20. She talked to me about it. It was unbelievable, and it turned into this. I mean, it made her a national star, and she was amazing with Carson. And yeah, just I mean, those were a lot of the best moments when people look back. I mean, I really think, unless something changed, the most requested clip that's licensed of Carson that I'm aware of, unless something changed, was the potato chip lady, who is this woman from Indiana who worked at a potato chip factory and would inspect the potato chips. And if any of them were deformed, she would take them. But she would recognize that some of them were in the shape of animals and even people. Like one looked like Bob Hope, she said, or Rodney Dangerfield. So she just, this made the newspaper that she was had this collection, and Carson had her on. And I mean, she made this into a career. She was traveling all over the world. And yeah, I mean, I've talked to some of these people. Like there was a guy who would play music with his hands, and he was a practicing lawyer, and he told me he was making more money from going on Carson, and he quit being a lawyer and would be playing Vegas into these lounges and doing appearances and making more money. I mean, he would definitely turn some of these people, they were called civilians, people, that's what the category was, that weren't famous, and make them famous. It was unbelievable power of the Tonight Show and Carson.
Though it's heavily scripted behind the scenes, what made that great, like you're saying, is the spontaneity for the audience that they don't know what to expect. Either,
Yeah.
Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra are coming out tonight, or it's the potato chip thing. It's like
Yeah.
you didn't know, so you were going in with that spontaneity of, oh, I don't know what's going to happen tonight, and that's what made that, I think, that show very interesting. So then, like you said, so he moves out to 1972, goes out to Burbank. And with that, it seemed like there was a changing of the guard in all of, I guess, mass media. That you didn't have to just make movies in New York, because that what it was. Movies and TV shows were TV shows in New York, movies in Hollywood, just because of the temperature out there. Uh, but then all of a sudden, TV goes out to California as well. And then all the comics started going out there, and that they wanted to get picked on and get on the Tonight Show at some point. So they're performing at the what eventually became the Comedy Store with Sammy Shore.
Hmm.
Then Bud Friedman moves the Improv out to California, out to Melrose. And then you had others, Laugh Factory and all the other comedy clubs that popped up. But that really was that gold mine. When you talk about the 80s comedy boom, it started in the 70s with a lot of these acts that moved from that great migration from New York, from Catch a Rising Star and the Improv and everything, and moving out to the Comedy Store and trying to get picked up by Mitzi Shore, Bud Friedman. And then you had people like Jim McCauley who were sitting in the audience and trying to recruit talent for the Tonight Show.
That's absolutely true. I mean, there's people like Dave Letterman who was making great money in
I've heard of
Indianapolis
him.
as a weatherman. Yeah, getting in his red pickup truck and driving across the country just with one goal is to do Carson. And Letterman didn't like doing stand up, but he knew that that was the way to get a he's a host, and he knew that that would be the way to emulate that. So yeah, I mean, Johnny just wanted, a part of it was bigger guest. He really, really liked that the audience was double in size. I mean, it went from like 250 to like, oh, like I don't know if it was 500, but it was something like that, 460. But they were limited with sketches in New York. You could only do something you'd have to put the sets in elevators, and kind of like Saturday Night Live, where you could bring in elephants, literally those elephant doors in Burbank. I mean, you could do anything. It was just a bigger scale show. And he just, fell in love with, he could drive and just be a little bit more privacy. And so that kind of that lifestyle. And Fred DeCordova, who was Jack Benny's producer, who was his producer the longest, he lasted the longest, was really, trying to get, from the moment he was hired, tried to get Carson to move the show to New York. And he would always say we can get bigger guests. And it took a while. Carson had it in his contract for a long time that the show would never originate and could not originate in California. And yeah, it just took a while to convince him.
That's interesting because it's so strange not to think that it's out in California, that everything's tape delayed. They tape it at 5 p.m., send it across to the affiliates and stuff. But then when Jimmy Fallon took over the Tonight Show, he's like, no, I want it back in New York, which was, for the first time in how long. And of course, Conan did his show, but he didn't do the Tonight Show out there. So it's fascinating how that move really kind of changed people's mindset, and that Jay Leno, I believe he was living in his car in the parking lot outside the Comedy Store so he can get more sets. And I when I was working in radio, I booked Jimmy J.J. Walker came into my
Wow.
studio. And he was showing me a picture, an old picture of him, where he was one of the few comics who could cross the picket lines and perform at both the Comedy Store and the Improv. Not many people did it. Some were on Team Mitzi, some were on Team Bud, and then there was the whole thing with what's his name? I was gonna say Steve Lukather there. No, that's Toto's guitars. Steve Lubetkin, who jumped off the Hyatt next to the Comedy Store into the parking lot during the strike when they weren't paying the comics. So that was all blowing up around that time. And then in that same year, 1979, I believe Johnny Carson said, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm done with the Tonight Show." What happened after that where that he said that he was retiring, he's finished with the show, that he ended up sticking around for another 13 years?
There were a bunch of times. I mean, I think it was in 65. He's told NBC he was done. He was just burned out, and he was going to do once a week and make probably more money just once a week, kind of like Jack Parr had left the Tonight Show and was doing on Sundays. And it just got to the point, I think, where Carson realized that this was his show, and it was a kind of a risk to start over, and it was completely working, and that he just couldn't let the thing go. And then in '79, I definitely think it was to get a little bit more control from NBC. He definitely said, he was packing it in, and I think that NBC at this point was, I mean, so reliant on Carson for money. The ad revenue was unbelievable. That yeah, he was definitely burned out. But I think Carson was addicted to doing the show. And once NBC, less vacation, more money, Carson went with it. And then in 1980 or early 80s, got ownership of the show. I mean, NBC would pretty much whatever Carson's demands were. Sometimes it could be a little bit of a battle. Like after a while, he didn't want to do the first 15 minutes anymore, especially because San Francisco had just dropped the first 15 minutes and New York. So it was like only like, I don't know, a small percentage. So he just, really, and NBC was like, we're going to hold you to the contract. And he just eventually was able to, override them and get what he wanted. But I mean, the guy did not, I don't think until 66 or 67, for the first 4 years, have a bathroom in his dressing room at NBC. He would have to go to the men's room at NBC with everybody else. And, you're the start of the Tonight Show. You think you'd expect that they would kind of do something and treat him like a star. And he never felt, especially those first 4 or 5 years. I mean, it was like a rug that in the dressing room that was from when Jerry Lester Broadway Open House was there, and it was just like, I think he requested like a new couch, and NBC's like, absolutely not. And so once he got the power, he really to NBC, he basically is like, you treated me like this for so long. I'm going to do whatever I want, and you're going to do it, and they did.
Yeah, but by the way, for you and the listeners, I don't want to give away too much from the book because I want people to go out and actually buy the book. I don't want people listening to this podcast and saying, "Well, why do I need to listen? Why do I need to buy the book? I already heard everything there is to know." But there are a couple of interesting things that I thought was an interesting tie-in with Johnny Carson and someone like Bob Hope. So Bob Hope was for the generation prior to my parents, he may as well have been the president of the United States. Technically not born here. Leslie Towns was born in England, but he grew up actually down the street from me here in Cleveland, Ohio. Um, and he made I mean, he was huge. Him and Bing Crosby with the road movies, and him being a comic and then eventually hosting all the Oscars, one of the great Oscar hosts, set the standard of what it meant to be an Oscars host at one time. But then by you were getting into the 60s, and Bob Hope was not the same. He was he was an establishment guy, and for the baby boomer generation, the counterculture generation, they looked at him as a war hawk, stumping for the Vietnam War and supporting the president, whoever it was, and golfing and with the generals and stuff. So it was funny how the generations looked at someone like Bob Hope, where mom and dad's generation were like, "Oh, Bob Hope," and it's like, yeah, who cares about Bob Hope? Well, I kind of saw that with Johnny Carson as well, where a certain generation looked up to him and said, "Oh, we love, he's hilarious. Who everyone wants to do an Art Fern impression, and you enjoyed the guests and you watched every night. It was a ritual." But then it seemed like by Generation X in the 80s that Carson was old Hollywood. It was that's what your parents listened to. That's what your parents watched. And they were looking for different options, whether it was Arsenio Hall, whether it was just anything else. And that's why you were seeing the rise of cable TV and alternative late night programming, because again, Carson for at this point decades had been number one. and the Generation X was going, yeah, but I don't know. We wanted a little bit more than what just watching what our parents were up to. Did you see that from your studies that people kind of wanted a little bit of a break from Johnny Carson?
I definitely think anything that's out there that's an institution like that has the danger. And I definitely think when Dave Letterman premiered, which Carson produced a show in February of '82, that it was hard for Johnny. That all the critics were just like, it's this new thing. And younger people just gravitated. I mean, to see, Dave is given some of attribution to Steve Allen for some of the stunts that he would do. But I mean, it was so, I mean, what Dave was doing was innovative and unbelievable. That NBC show from, February of '82 to June of '93 was unbelievable. And I think that the people that got hooked on that, the younger people, it was harder for them to watch Carson. And like Johnny, to his credit, like sometimes people, when they, something is new, they try to emulate it. Johnny did a little bit, like he tried to do some Dave type bits and they never worked and it was awkward. But for the most part, he kept the bookings. He kept, the older people that he revered and stuff with the bookings. And they, Johnny's nephew, Jeff Sotzing, who was a producer on the show, was trying to, convince Bobby Quinn, the director, Johnny's director, to do like more innovative camera shots like Arsenio was doing. And, he just was like, they were just very old school. And they're like, no, this is not how we do it. And Johnny, still, I mean, had higher ratings than Arsenio. Nobody touched him in 30 years. I think Letterman, that was probably Johnny's biggest fear, was going up against Letterman. And they paid Letterman, NBC, like, I think $1 million for at least a year not to work. And he was just guest hosting the Tonight Show once in a while. But Dave was like, I need something. And the fear is that he was going to be syndicated on Westinghouse. And he was talking to Westinghouse to go opposite Johnny. And I don't think Dave wanted to do that, but it was like to the point where there weren't a lot of options for that. And he just was getting paid a gazillion dollars to do nothing. But he just, was just waiting for NBC to do something. I think like it was the best thing ever for Carson to not go against Letterman. That was like his biggest fear. So to have the show after him and not to give Letterman for the first like 4 years Fridays. Like Fridays is when the college kids and everyone high school people stay up. So like Letterman could only do Monday through Thursday. They would give him 5 Friday specials a year, and they had all these limitations that Carson thought would put David at disadvantage, like no monologue. You could only do 4 jokes and couldn't call it a monologue, opening remarks. The band could only be 4 people, no brass instruments, and all these things that Merrill Marco, who's Dave, created the show with Dave, the head writer, was just like, they were hilarious because they were so not, can't do stump the band, all these things they wouldn't have done anyway. And I feel like it all worked out in Letterman's advantage, all these rules that Johnny implemented. But he definitely, I don't think you last 30 years like that unless you're competitive and paranoid. At one point in New York in 1970, he had 3 competitors and he had 4 TVs going on at 11:30. And in his apartment in New York, he was watching himself, Dick Cavett, Merv Griffin, David Frost. Yeah, it was so the 4 just go in and he would just, with like an athlete, just like a coach watching the films and just studying the stuff. He was obsessed.
Yeah, and the thing is, there an edict that David Letterman couldn't have Carson guests on, right?
It would no, it wasn't that. It was just they had approval, and it was I think a certain amount of days that if they had done Johnny's show, they couldn't be on for a certain X amount of days. But like you did, like I mean, definitely like Carson wanted Dave in New York because you'd have less at least back then talent pool of guests. And I think Newhart, maybe like Johnny, like staple guest, like Newhart, I think only did the NBC show twice, maybe Rickles once or twice. So it was definitely a lot of different guests. Like Letterman would have on like Harvey P. Carr, or like people like
Andy
Chris.
Kaufman.
Yes, exactly. And just that worked in his advantage so much. Where Johnny, for the most part, was just doing a completely different show. And yeah, it was just different. And I definitely think for the younger people. I mean, Dave, I mean, I still think that that show, that NBC 11:30 show I mean, I think it holds up. It's unbelievable how good that show is.
Yeah, I want to go away a little bit from Johnny Carson, just talk about
Sure.
late night in general, because what we're talking, you mentioned about Conan, and
Yeah.
that first year of Conan, I was a little young, but I do remember reading, and I think there was an ex thing maybe 2 years ago, it was the 30th anniversary, and they did an oral history with Robert Smigel and Conan and people who worked on the show, and how that first season they tried to do something different. For people who don't know, that Conan was chosen by Lorne Michaels. What they did when Letterman ended up moving to CBS and we had that late night show, instead of NBC naming a host, they put it in Lorne Michaels' hands, and it was Lorne's time slot to try to sell to the affiliates and everything. And there were other people. Gary Shandling was rumored. Dana Carvey was rumored. Drew Carey, I think, was one of them. Paul Provenza told me that he was up for it. I don't know how true that is. I knew a couple of other people who were a part of it, and all of a sudden it goes to this guy who worked for who was at Harvard and wrote Simpsons episodes and SNL for a little bit, and this red-haired 6'4" Conan O'Brien type. And that first year, it was very different. It was Robert Smigel, Louis C.K. I think Dave Attell wrote for him for a little bit, and they would do Rotting Fruit Theater. They had the masturbating bear and all these other weird things that you weren't necessarily seeing. Uh, but it was fun to tinker with the format the way a previous decade earlier that David Letterman did. However,
Yeah.
you kind of see late night TV right now is just it's like they picked the standard and they haven't really tinkered with the format in 30 years at this point. It's been since Carson that every show has leaned on monologue with topical jokes. Second segment, you banter with your sidekick or the band leader. First guest, second guest, comedian, or the musical act. And I look at that as far as late night goes. It's not so much the politics that people were leaving. It's that I think a lot of people in late night, the viewers they didn't have to stay up and wait till 11:30 to laugh at something. That you have this little cell phone that's next to you, and if you want to laugh, you just go on TikTok or YouTube and you find something to laugh at. And I think a lot of that just it seemed like, in my opinion, people kind of leaned into the getting comfortable with here's the format, this is what we're going to do. It's understood between the host and the crew and the audience that this is what you're about to get yourself into. And I don't know, it feels like we need a little bit of a tinkering of formats, in my opinion.
It's, Steve Allen was the first one to have a desk, and the desk stuck, and then Jack Parr with the couch. And yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, Conan at 12:30, they really did try. They tried to do a monologue that wasn't topical, and it just did not work. And after a few months, they were like, okay, we're gonna go back to topical. They really were doing so much scripted comedy, not giving Conan a chance to really find his voice. But I mean, I was going to those early tapings, and I mean, I would drive from Pennsylvania, and I was going to the show, and I mean, it was rough from the moment Conan would come out for for his warm up and sing Elvis Presley, "Hunk of Burning Love." People were just kind of like, "Who is this guy? We have no idea." And it took him and Andy about 2 years, I think, a year and a half, to really find their true voice as performers. I mean, I definitely think like that summer, because it was the first time I ever saw people a little bit excited, like college students. And that was a really exciting thing that people actually wanted to be there, but they couldn't get big guests for like the first year or two. I mean, it was definitely when people have tried to depart from the format.
Wait, are you telling me in
Yeah,
1993 that the
yeah,
kids aren't really interested in seeing Werner Klemperer? I mean, I
yeah,
love it. I watch Hogan's Heroes, but my
yeah.
goodness.
Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, it was great because you could get like people like Steve Allen and Joe Franklin and all these people to kind of come back that weren't maybe getting booked at 11:30 certainly. But yeah, Conan, I mean, oh gosh, just it's unbelievable the success story, because like no one wanted the gig. I mean, they tried to cancel him, but there's like every 12, 13 weeks renewing, but Greg Kinnear said no, Rosie O'Donnell said no, and then previously before that, Shanley said no, Carvey said no, Dana Carvey said no, and
I mean, how
It-
great was Larry Sanders? It's like, no, I'm not
that
going to
still
do a
holds
late
up.
night show. I'm going
Yeah.
to do a parody of a late night show.
Yeah, it still holds up. But I
Amazing.
sometimes I get emails from younger people that are like, I found Carson on YouTube, and they'll say about what they like. But sometimes they'll be like, "Have you ever heard of this show?" It's like almost like this underground secret, the Larry Sanders Show, and it really holds up. Comedy is hard to do like that, and yeah, phenomenal cast, phenomenal writing.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Letterman went over to CBS and people expected the old 12:30 Letterman, and I don't know what the difference between an 11:30 audience and a 12:30 audience is, but apparently there's a difference, and that there were certain things, and the humor had to be tamed a little bit for whatever reason, getting to 11:30. And I don't know, I just kind of thought, outside of a few instances, that the Letterman was on CBS for, I think, what, 23 years, I believe, 22 years. But it didn't seem like it was the same Dave that came over from NBC. Although I did respect him, I enjoyed the monologues. I still enjoyed some of the goofier, subversive humor. But I think eventually, by that point, Dave kind of became the man now, like the way Carson was, where you're this countercultural figure, and then eventually you gain that kind of popularity, and you take that over. And I remember it, at least growing up in my house. And again, I'm in my 30s right now, but I remember my parents would stay up and they would flip back and forth. You'd have that button on your remote where you can easily flip back between channels, and we'd say, "Whose monologue do we want to watch tonight, Letterman or Leno?" And it was always like flipping back and forth between the commercials just to watch them, which was kind of cool, having that competition that Johnny Carson largely did not have, because he destroyed the competition, anybody who went up against him. But I will say, though, towards the end of the 80s, when the Joan Rivers show started on Fox and there was the falling out with him, that it did seem like Johnny was for your parents. And I think one of the great sketches of all time, that obviously you know because you talked to Dana Carvey, was the Carsenio sketch where he tries to do all the Arsenio Hall movements, and Phil Hartman is playing Ed McMahon doing yes, and has the high top haircut. Oh, is that just it was funny, but I think didn't Johnny Carson not wasn't a big fan of that impression of
He just it
Dana
was hard
Carvey.
for him with those sketches just because they portrayed him as a bit senile and out of touch, and he wouldn't book the rock bands normally, and he definitely held to um the voice of his show for 30 years, whereas Dave would book those acts, and they just kind of portrayed him as out of touch, and it bothered him. Like that sketch when that Coach Carcinio aired, I think it was like a week later or something. 5 days later, he announced his retirement. It was that there was one earlier in 1990. Robert Smigel wrote the sketches. It was October of '90. Patrick Swayze hosted SNL, and they had one of those sketches with Dana as Johnny, and they're doing the Tonight Show, and Chris Rock as Arsenio, and it was just there were a couple of things that just really bothered Johnny, and he NBC Rick Ludwin, who was the vice president of NBC Late Night, would give Johnny the heads up on Thursday. They're planning on doing a sketch. They're going to take it to dress rehearsal. Whether it makes the show, we don't know. And Johnny, to his credit, he never was like, "I want this killed." He might have been able to, but he just said, I don't really get it. I don't think it's funny, but we make fun of people all the time on our show, so it's not like he was like they can't do it. He's just like, I just don't find it funny.
It was kind of the same way with SCTV, that Rick Moranis did a George Carlin impression. And George Carlin, for how many years, was the counterculture comedian. Everyone loved George Carlin. But by the 80s, he was doing a lot more wordplay. Then eventually he got very angry towards the end of his career. But when he saw Rick Moranis doing, like, talking about beats, beats, that's a funny word, beats, beats me. And according to Kelly Carlin, George was like, yeah, I got to change something because I'm not, they're now parodying me, and that
Yeah.
might needs to change. And I think I heard that with Johnny. It was like, oh, they're making fun of me now. Okay. And It's obviously it's the difference between a lot of impressions you'd probably see nowadays is that Dana Carvey loved Johnny Carson. That impression was out of obviously for humorous, but it was out of love for somebody that you respected, you watched on TV at that point for nearly 30 years. So he could do it. He looked like him, one of the great SNL performers. But yeah, it really had that feeling towards the end of the 80s that there was going to eventually be that changing of the guard. And then, yeah, by 90, 91, he announced that he's going to hang it up in 1992. And talk about the hoopla that was surrounding with NBC as far as obviously replacing him. There was the late night wars between Leno and Letterman, who's going to get the gig, who deserves the gig. Talk about what NBC was doing because you're talking about in the 1980s. You not only had Carson at night, followed by Letterman, but then you had Thursday nights were a lock, and nobody was tuning out of NBC because you were watching whatever they were having. They were on a massive run at that point, but I'm assuming they were probably freaking out going like, "What are we going to do when our meal ticket for 29 years is hanging it up?"
Jay was getting good ratings at 11:30. He was the permanent guest host that they made in I think it was 87 or 88 because Gary Shandling didn't want it. And they were Peter Lasalle, Johnny's producer, really wanted to give it to him, and Shandling said no, so they made it Leno. And Jay said yes whenever NBC wanted him to do benefits or meet or say hi to advertisers. Jay's manager had him go to all the NBC affiliates. It was just everything Letterman wouldn't do. Letterman's whole philosophy was, that they're going to give it to the best person. And Dave, just would make fun of the NBC execs on air. He would not do all those things that Jay would do with the politicking. And it
Yeah,
really
It
hurt
wasn't Jay going to
Letterman.
actual affiliates. Like he would
Yeah,
stop by, tour the
yeah.
country, whether he was doing a gig, but
He
then
went
he
to
would go
every
into the,
state.
yeah, he went
Yeah,
to the local NBC affiliate that was showing him, and he would go and do little promos and do the
yeah.
weather and
His
silly banter on the
assistant,
morning show.
Helen Kushnick, was brilliant in that aspect in terms of the politicking because it worked. And then you had NBC execs on both coasts that the East Coast wanted Dave, the West Coast wanted Jay, and it just they went back and forth. And I mean, I really think that a lot of it had to do with that they could control Jay a lot easier than Dave. I mean, and they made. I mean, listen, they made the right call in terms of if you want somebody at number one, Jay, that's his legacy. He was number one. Can't argue with that. Like when people look back now, it's very much like kind of like reminds me a little bit of the Honeymooners, which was number two in its time slot. Perry Como was one, and people don't remember Perry Como. I mean, everyone worships Dave in that show, and Jay's show was number one, but not really. Sometimes we'll talk about it, not the most memorable, but he was number one, and it's can't take that away from him. It was just very different, but no one's gonna outwork Jay.
Yeah, the Late Night Wars. They did that movie. I saw it once. Got good performances, but didn't
Kathy
think it
Bates
was.
was, yeah, really
Yeah, the
solid.
the Late Shift, I believe, is called.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we're talking about things we're stumping for things that almost don't really exist to young people. Because you mentioned about how Gen X, they're in high school, they're in college, that we're staying up later. We're a 24-hour people at this point. We have cable TV. You have CNN is broadcasting wars in real time by the 90s. And if you're staying up late, yeah, you have some cable TV, but a lot of it was infomercials until The Daily Show was coming on around in the mid 90s. You were looking for something to laugh at and enjoy. That's where the college kids really helped Conan when he started, where it's like, okay, what are we leaning towards? And I forgot who it was that said, everyone I come back, my kids in college, and everyone's talking about Conan. They love this show. They love this subversive humor, and it really kind of gave them a little bit more of a bit of a boost in those early rough days. And late night, but then now you talk about late night TV, and we're coming off of when we're recording this was around the time of the Jimmy Kimmel quote unquote censorship, and it's interesting because I think regardless if the FCC got involved or Donald Trump or whatever, that it probably wasn't going to be long for that time because Stephen Colbert was announced that CBS said, "Hey, we're losing 40 million a year on Colbert." And now you have this thing with Kimmel. I just I think it's we're going to get to a point where that late night TV on network TV is a dinosaur, and eventually they're either going to put more news programs or they're I don't know going to fill that time slot with old episodes of Coach. I
I
don't know
don't know. The
what they're going to do.
metrics have just changed. Every year, network TV, the ratings go or less. And it's just, some formats are cyclical. Like, for example, game shows in prime time in the early 90s or 80s, like that never would, people would be like, you're not going to see this. And then reality shows, everyone's like, the scripted stuff's gone. And now reality shows, it's very hard to get them on TV. Things get cyclical. I really hope there's always some sort of late night show. Good Netflix experimented with John Mulaney. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's a shame for people's jobs that Colbert is going away. I mean, I had a day job at the Colbert Report. I was there for 3 years and 8 months. Really a good time over there. And yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. I just didn't foresee being number one. It just shows, it says a lot when you can be number one and get canceled.
I think a lot of viewing habits change because I think we saw it during COVID a few years ago. Is that these shows they had to pivot. They were doing it from their home. They didn't have a studio audience, so you're seeing that. But at the same time, I think a lot of people just changed as far as how we consume information and consume I mean it really is kind of feels the way of the newspaper. Does a newspaper exist when we're talking in 2025? Sure. I'm gonna get it delivered tomorrow morning. I can read it. But largely it's made up of regional people or AI. That's another big one that Hollywood is really scared of, and I think a lot everybody should be concerned about the future of that. It's just watching late night TV and hearing about the controversy and stuff. I think it's probably one of the last times we're going to have nationwide conversations about this what seems like the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus or SeaWorld, elements of a bygone era. Because again, I used to work in radio, and I remembered being there at an alternative radio station, and they wanted what's it going to take for college kids to listen to our radio station? I said, I don't know. I don't think you can reach them. I don't think you're going to tell them to turn off Spotify and listen to something with that's heavily edited with commercials. It's kind of tough to do that. We've already jumped it to this point in the lexicon that I don't necessarily think you can tell younger kids, hey, there's this really funny show, but you have to wait until 11:30 tonight to watch it. Are there commercials? Oh yeah, there's commercials like every 5 minutes. It's really tough because the main audience right now are the baby boomers, and they're unfortunately passing away at this time. So it's rough. I actually really do feel for the writers and a lot of people in the staff. It's expensive to keep on the air, but I don't know what the pivot is going forward.
I don't know. There's just so many options out there, and anybody with a phone can film content, and it's a different time. I just really hope that there's always something out there like this. I mean, they definitely like Seth Meyers lost his band. I don't know what other cuts they're gonna make to late night, but yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where younger people I know really like Seth Meyers and they like um that in particular and John Oliver, but they don't. I mean, for the most part, from what I hear, they watch on their phones or they'll just watch. They're not watching when it's happening
Or how about this?
necessarily.
You said younger people are actually going back in time and watching stuff like Johnny Carson and
Some yes,
The
yes,
Larry Sanders Show. So
yeah, yeah.
there's even on, I think it's Pluto TV, you can, instead of watching tonight's episode of Colbert or Kimmel or Fallon or Seth Meyers, you can watch a 1977 episode of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson in place
Right.
of it. And that's just what it is. I said that during COVID is there's no baseball on right now to watch, so I guess I'm going to watch an old baseball game from years gone by. Now, I know the outcome of this game. I know, but I know the figures, and it seemed like it was a better product back then than it was today, or whatever the case is. We have so many different options. We don't have that time where everybody's sitting in our homes outside the Super Bowl and the halftime show and everything. But outside of that, there isn't a time where everybody's getting together to watch the finale of MASH. Everybody's getting together to watch the Seinfeld finale, and everybody's getting together to watch the final episode of the Johnny Carson Tonight Show.
Yeah, I mean, there was something really special and exciting about that, the final cheers. I mean, yeah, I remember where I was when Carson went off the air, that May 22nd of 92, that Friday. And I remember just the significance I felt. And it was just, yeah, it was really, really tough to knowing that losing him. And then I was at the very first taping of Letterman's CBS show on August 30th, 93. And Dave was the biggest thing in television, and that was really exciting. I feel like that was probably the last time that late night had never been bigger when Dave, like the ticket requests were like unbelievable to get. I mean, so hard to get tickets, and it was almost event, appointment television, and people the next day were talking about it nonstop. And I think Letterman, after a year or two, I think that the pace was just too much for him, and the things started to change, and I think the amount of time he was spending on the show, it just started to decline, and it declined even further throughout the years, and the show kind of turned into something else.
Listen to this. For you want to talk about the end of an era. I've talked about this on my podcast. How decades don't end at the turn of the decade; that they kind of bleed over a little bit. Where the 70s, especially if you were in Middle America, the 70s continued well into the early 80s. The 90s, I felt ended, or I mean, the 80s felt like it ended in the about 1992, in the spring of 92. So check out the shows that all left the air around the time Johnny Carson left the air. Growing Pains, April 25th, 1992. Who's the Boss? April 25th, 1992. Cosby Show, April 30th, 1992. Golden Girls, May 9th, 1992. MacGyver, May 21st, 1992. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, May 22nd, 1992. And then Night Court ended a week later, May 31st of 1992. Talk about a changing of the guard as far as entertainment went.
Yeah, I mean, shows with longevity and household names and just people, yeah, going away. Yeah, it was a huge deal. I don't think I realized there was that many, altogether. That's
All
amazing
within
to
six
think
weeks of each
about.
other.
Yeah, it was one of those things. And then Jay took about I'd say at least a year to figure out that show. I was actually at a taping. He went to New York for a trip, and he was in 8H, and they for the first time had like a thrust stage, and he basically went back to Burbank and moved studios and recreated like an 8H type situation, and finally found his voice, but it took about a year. But yeah, and then you had Seinfeld. I mean, NBC just, I mean, how powerful were they with that Thursday lineup that Jay benefited from? And yeah, it was yeah, looking back at those glory years, I guess that maybe they're of NBC.
I've grown to respect Jay Leno, but there was that one time where we all kind of collectively jumped off the Jay Leno bandwagon when he said in 2004, in 5 years, I'm going to leave and I'm going to give this show to Conan O'Brien. So he does. 2009, he's done. Then he starts this not necessarily late night syndicated show at 10 p.m. and affiliates couldn't stand it, and it was bleeding into news, and it was all that, and it didn't really last very long. It was basically it's the Tonight Show an hour and a half early. It didn't really work out too well, and then all of a sudden he rejoins and is with the Tonight Show again. What were your thoughts on that whole situation? And I honestly, I thought some of the jokes that because I'm somebody I like to burn a couple of bridges in my time, that it seemed like when Conan's writers were doing that and attacking NBC on a nightly basis, that was you want to talk about must see TV. I was watching that every night.
That was definitely in terms of energy and in terms of what was going to happen, people turning in. I mean, it was tough. NBC didn't want to lose Conan to go to Fox. They were offering him $20 million, and the NBC would have looked really bad, I think, if they lost Conan and he overtook Jay. And they really thought, Jay is getting older, and even though he's number one, and they came up with this idea that in whatever 4 or 5 years that Conan would get the Tonight Show and Jay would leave. And Jay, he said it told a white lie, which was that he was agreed to it, but I know behind the scenes he was upset. And um, yeah, that was really hard for him. And then Conan, when Jay was at 10 o'clock and not getting great ratings, that affected Conan. And I mean, Conan did not get enough time to figure out that show. I mean, at 11:30, it's extremely, extremely different. I think if he had more time like Jay, like a full year, he would have figured it out and had a better lead in. But I honestly, and I know that I can't even imagine how hard that was for Conan. I feel like he's so much better off doing his podcast and doing the HBO show and doing the TBS stuff. I feel like everything worked out better for him. I know, I think he's probably said that, but at the time it was really tough. And then Jay comes back and he's number one. I mean, Jay to this day, I think it's tough for him. He wants people to like him, and I get it. We all do. But I think that was a really tough time. It was just strange to me that, like, I mean, he got his friend Seinfeld, he got a bunch of other people. I think one of the writers on that show and a couple other people. I think Mavis, his wife at the time, just to talk to the press, just to defend Jay, and he just wasn't used to getting dragged by the press and by the public, and it was just one of those things where they just were trying to step up and be there for him. And I think that was rough for Jay, and but I think ultimately it worked out better for the best for Conan. But that was definitely, I did not see that come in, that they would pull him like that. And just at one point it was, I thought if it was like they gave Conan $40 million to go away. And I was told, I thought they would have to pay Leno like 150 million, but Jay told me that that wasn't true. But that was what was reported, that if Jay left the 10 o'clock show, that the NBC would have to pay him 150 million. But he denied that to me. But I thought that that was pretty much set in stone. And just NBC would have looked, they looked bad enough that they had to give up $40 million just for nothing to give to Conan. But for 150 million, talk about bad press. I mean, they would have just, I mean, if that was true, giving that to Jay for him to go away. But Jay told me that wasn't true.
Speaking of money and Jay Leno, is it
Yeah.
true the rumor that the money he's made in the Tonight Show he doesn't touch and that he only uses the money he's made from comedy gigs?
That's what he says. I mean, my guess is he probably has something very similar to Johnny Carson, which Carson, when he passed away, it was revealed a couple years later that he had a foundation, the Johnny Carson Foundation, and I think it was 180 million. I think it was the largest at the time, any entertainer, I believe, foundation. I'm sure Jay's probably saving the money and going to do something similar. I would think with that. But yeah, he says he doesn't touch. He just lives off his stand up. I mean, the guy. I don't know how he did it. I mean, to be number one for that long and then he was doing at least 180 shows a year at the Tonight Show, and then doing like 150 to 200 corporate dates and doing stand up on Sundays at Hermosa Beach at the
Yeah, the
Comedy
Comedy
Magic.
Magic Club.
I mean, I don't know. There's certain people I only know like one or two people that can really do 4 hours of sleep at night and have full energy and be in function. I can't do that. Most people can. Jay is one of those people. And I don't know how he did it. It's unbelievable. And he just loves hanging out in his garage with the cars and doing comedy. And yeah, I mean, it's what the guy's accomplished in terms of being number one. You can't take that away from him. But looking back on their legacy of what that show was, there's really not many memorable moments that I can think of other than the Hugh Grant thing, which isn't even a joke. I mean, that it was just like, Hugh Grant got caught with and is basically going in front of the public. He's plugging a movie and he kept the booking, which was very people couldn't believe, and him kind of apologizing, and Jay just delivering a line about that. But that's what, for the most part, specific time memories, that's what people remember, that one thing. And it's hard for specific memories for Jay's time at the Tonight Show.
Well, or you could be memorable in different ways and either book Howard Stern on the Magic Hour with Magic Johnson.
Oh gosh,
Oof,
when they're
oof, oof.
playing Wipeout with the farting noises,
Yeah, the
that
the farting people,
um,
and then he just goes up there and wants who was it? Was it no, it wasn't Apple? Who was the Sheila E? He wanted her to
yeah.
take her top off, and then
Oh,
was
really? That's
and
I didn't remember that. I don't even think I watched that. I just knew about it when he went on Magic Hour. But
it's very uncomfortable if you watch it. It's from I think 98, and Howard takes over the interview, asks Magic about all the times he's cheated on Cookie and the HIV and everything, and then he goes to Sheila E, says, "Take your top off," and hey, what happened to the white guy that you kicked off the show? And you go,
oh,
yeah,
Craig
like
Shoemaker. He definitely said Howard's stipulation was that they could play Wipeout with the farts, and
yes.
man, that was so disrespectful. I mean, it's just the fact that Magic Johnson's people were trying to get them out of doing that because it's kind of disrespectful, but they got to do it, and it was. Listen, those are the hardest gigs. Johnny made it look easy, and people thought they could do it. And I could rattle off the guest host, and I mean, so many people tried to do that. There were comedians that could not do it. It's the hardest thing to do every single night.
Well,
So many people have tried, and for someone like Magic Johnson, who's I'm sure very funny and witty, to do it every night. It's so hard to do, and it takes a while to figure out on air. And I don't know who told him that he thought that this would be a good idea, but yeah, this format, it just didn't work.
well, in 5 years prior was the launch of the Chevy Chase show, and I think it lasted about 23
It
episodes.
was
That
something like that. No one is going to be able to figure out how to do a show like that. The show did progressively get better. He was uncomfortable. The first show was not good. The first show never should have aired. That
with the
was a
was that
that
with the cake and Goldie Hawn?
Yeah, with yeah, Oliver Hudson was in the audience for that. That was not that was really hard. I don't think to me the Chevy Chase show is very much like I think Elaine May talks about
Or,
Ishtar. The people that
yes.
talk about Ishtar had never, for the most part, that bash it had never really seen it. I mean, there are funny moments in Ishtar, but it's just like the Chevy Chase show. People, I don't, I think that they just watched the first episode, but it got, in my opinion, it got progressively better. And I think if they would have kept him on, he would have figured it out. It's just tough because he was such a big star, and they're not going to give a big star a year to figure that out. And they had probably promised the affiliates like these big ratings from the top, and it was going to take a while.
He
And they
was
just,
I mean, he wasn't a comic. I mean, Chevy Chase was funny, but he did a lot of pratfalls. He's funny in movies. He's funny when people have written things for him, but he's not an off-the-cuff stand-up. And if you watch it, there's a bunch of the episodes. I've gone back
uh,
when I've been bored and watching those shows. And like you said, they did get better, but it was like he was trying not to be Johnny. He was trying to be Ernie Kovacs, if anything.
That's right. Yeah, he wanted to do Kovacs type stuff. And the film pieces, I thought that they did some good film pieces, but Chevy guest hosted for Johnny once in '86 and had a really tough time, and went on with Carson like a month later, a couple weeks later, and was like, nobody knows how hard, Chevy. I had no idea how hard this was. Nobody's going to be the next Johnny Carson. And he just, for whatever reason, in 1986, I guess, blocked out how hard it was, because in '93, when he took that gig, and I get it. They paid him a lot of money, and it's an attractive thing. And Chevy is very, very funny. But to do that every night, they would play this poker game. It was Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and yeah, Johnny. And Johnny would be like, Chevy, you're really gonna go for 5 nights a week. You really are gonna do this. And he would just kind of poke fun of him. But Johnny was serious. He's like, it's brutal.
What wasn't the joke that Chevy Chase couldn't improvise a fart at a bean eating contest?
Johnny said that off the record to Tom Shales of the Washington Post, and it got back to Chevy and got but yeah, and then Johnny later in a Rolling Stone interview, a bunch of years later in '79, acknowledged that, but Johnny didn't like Saturday Night Live. He gave Lorne Michaels. I mean, the show wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Johnny. And he watched a Good Nights one week, and they had a minute or two to kill, and no one was ad-libbing, and no one had anything. Like Eddie Murphy one time, and before he was really famous on SNL, they had like a minute or two to kill, and they just let Eddie do his thing, and he just lit up the screen, and it was unbelievable. But no, nobody was really saying anything or doing anything, and Johnny kind of like Johnny looked down upon that. And then it was tough because Chevy, after I think it was like 8 episodes or something, New York Magazine heralds Chevy as the successor to Johnny Carson, and I think that was tough for Carson. And then he had a problem with the show, and then Jane Curtin, I think in '77, did an update joke about that made fun of Carson, and not it was not a nice joke, but and so I think there were a bunch of things where Johnny was just like. I don't like the show. I'm not going to put anybody that is a cast member. No, none of the original cast did the show as cast members on SNL. Chevy wrote Johnny a letter, I think it was 77, 78, and was like, can I come on the show and just kind of apologize for some things he said? And Johnny, people would do that. They would apologize and write letters. And Johnny, for the most part, there were definitely times with Chevy's thing where he's like, what he got together with Chevy at NBC and they kind of hit it off and they became friends, but it was definitely icy in the beginning. But yeah, I don't think his disdain for SNL. I mean, once in a while he thought certain sketches were funny, but overall he did not like the show. And he certainly this Robert Smigel sketches were one of the contributing factors of him retiring.
So you mentioned about writing the letters, and Joan Rivers obviously
Yeah,
was the main fill-in for a long time. People loved her. Then
3 years
she gets this offer to go to Fox. Says this
permanent. Yeah.
upstart company gets her own show, and the word is that Johnny just wrote her off. Didn't talk to her again. Was there a Johnny Carson blacklist that was going on that you did this, so you will never appear on my show again?
There were people like Burt Reynolds said he saw a list of names. Rich Little told me he saw a list of names. There were definitely, and I talk about in the book, I think I mentioned maybe 20 of them that did certain things, that did very specific things on the air that made them banned from the show. I mean, there were levels like Rivers was never allowed to go back on the show ever again, but then you had certain people that were allowed to go on with guest hosts. And then there were certain people that were demoted. There were only three I know of that were demoted from Johnny to guest host that were strong enough to come back and get back with Johnny, which was Steve Martin, Charles Grodin, and Dick Shawn eventually. It took Dick Shawn like 10 years or something to get back with Johnny. But for the most part, it was very black and white when Johnny was done with somebody, they were done. But I go into, I think probably the most comprehensive um, details of what happened with Joan Rivers and Carson. It was not. I'm always like I'm always shocked when people really think that things are as simplistic as Johnny is. Joan didn't tell Johnny, and Johnny never talked to her again. End of story. And Johnny didn't owe anybody an explanation of what happened behind the scenes. I go into it, and people can decide for themselves what they think about it. I mean, I talked to a lot of people over the Carson camp, and then talk about Joan Rivers people and what they thought and what really happened. And people have to make their own minds. But it was a very much more complex than Joan just not telling Johnny um, about the show. And she was the permanent guest host for 3 years. I mean, her Vegas money shot through the roof. I mean, she always said her debut on Carson, like, I mean, Carson made her. And the way she handled it, Johnny, just basically said I would have handled it differently. I don't think she handled it well. And, he was very diplomatic about it for the most part.
So Johnny retires. It's May of 1992, and
Hmm.
for the next 13 years, he made basically what, two appearances. I remember. I think he did a Simpsons thing, and then he went on to do a top 10 list on Letterman, but he didn't speak that time.
That's
And
right. I always tell people that he retired in May of '92 from the Tonight Show, but I don't really think he retired till I like to say until May of '94. He did The Simpsons, he did the American Teacher Awards, he got the Presidential Medal of Honor from George Bush and went there. He did the Bob Hope 90th birthday, The Simpsons. He did a Letterman, at least one or two Letterman phone calls, or a phone call. He did a pre-tape on Letterman, but he only did the one live in studio that one time. But after '94, he was gone. I mean, it was he
why
might.
was that? Was he just done with the spotlight, or did he have more personal problems, or it just seemed like he was kind of just puttering around Malibu?
I think that just like an athlete or anybody, you just want to go out on the top of your game and you don't want to stick around too long. And he looked at people like Bob Hope, Lucille Ball, Jack Benny, people he really admired, thought they stuck around too long and the quality of the work diminished and never want to get like that, go out on top. What he accomplished was unbelievable for 30 years with no serious competition and the legacy he left. And he just didn't want to, come back. And he definitely took meetings and was thinking about it, about certain things. And just at the end of the day, he's like, you know what, I did it. And I think he definitely missed the monologue. And he was, he definitely had the bug. Like the last year or so of his life or so, he was writing jokes for Dave Letterman, monologue jokes secretly, and faxing them into Dave's show. And he definitely missed it, but at the same time, he didn't need like a Regis Philbin or a Don Rickles where they had to be in front of an audience for them to feel good about themselves, and they just couldn't. They could never, even though Regis left that show, he still needed wherever he went. Like it's interesting to me, like certain people, I guess if they're not around it, think that like, oh, I don't want to bother that still I'm the famous person. There are, and I've been with them in person. Certain people like Regis loved it. He could that was like his oxygen with people coming up to him and getting autographs, doing photos, and he just needed that, whereas Carson just didn't need it. I mean, he definitely missed the monologue, but he didn't have to stick around as long as certain people. I mean, he just thought that there were certain people that just did not. It was just hard. It was hard for him to watch. I know that I talk about this in the book. He went to see Sinatra, who he idolized Sinatra, and he saw Sinatra. I think it was like in the 90s, but Frank, I think his last retired in 94, maybe something like that. And it was just Johnny just thought the whole performance was just I mean, Sinatra was missing words here and there, like all these lyrics, even though he had everything up on the screen, the words, and he just thought, this is just not who I want to
Oh, so it's
be.
like Frankie Valli at this point.
Speculation with the lip syncing with him. I do not know he's 90 years old. I
Oh
know he's
no,
still
I
cranking.
can confirm this because I saw him last
Okay.
year, and
Okay.
within two notes of the first
Yeah.
song, "Grease is the word," I'm like, he ain't
Yeah.
singing. And
Yeah. There's,
there were
yeah.
times his lips weren't moving along with the track, and it's not like they it got Frankie Valli in his 80s where you can kind of like, all right, it makes sense. It was you're getting maybe a recording from the late 80s of like 1980s of Frankie Valli. He's not hitting those notes anymore. And then when he eventually would talk to the crowd, they had to crank his microphone up so loud you were getting feedback from from the
Wow.
speakers he thanked his doctor in the crowd and everything. But I'm like, they're that's a good point about Johnny Carson of knowing your close, knowing when it's time. You don't want to overstay your welcome. And yeah, like you said about with Bob Hope, that final special where he's doing the Jack Frost, where he's he's doing him and Dolores are doing this Jack Frost bit where he's wearing is an all white. He has this white mustache, and he's like, "I'm Jack Frost. I'm Bob Hope." And you're going, "Ooh, ooh, ooh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's probably time, Grandpa."
Like if somebody can still do it, like I feel Letterman hasn't lost anything when he goes on shows and like there was speculation a lot that Dave would pull a Johnny, which is, retired and you would never see this guy again. But I feel like he's held his own 100%.
Mhm.
And I just think Johnny, he had quit smoking and gained weight. He looked a little different and his voice that got it a little bit. And he just was very self-conscious and just made that
I'll,
decision. But
I'll give you
the
another
hope
one.
thing,
Dick
yeah.
Cavett. I've heard
Yeah.
him on podcasts. I've heard him on interviews. For a guy who's almost 90, he's still very sharp.
He's unbelievable. I've gotten together with him a bunch of times and he's wonderful. And I was so honored he loved my book. I got it to him and Martha, his Rogers, his wife, delightful. And I was just so happy. But Cavett, but yeah, he still is just so funny and so sharp and what a career.
So well, Dick Cavett's also one of them that also tinkered with the format, and Tom Snyder and Bob Costas and everything. So there a demand for late night TV? Well, there's a demand for late night entertainment, and for anybody who's going to fill in and become the next whoever is on and whatever takes that place, you know that the standard, even if the Tonight Show had predated Johnny Carson, that the standard was set by Johnny Carson. That every time that you tune in tonight to Stephen Colbert, to Jimmy Kimmel, to John Oliver, to Jon Stewart, to anybody who you're going to watch, John Mulaney. There's a lot of Johns, uh, and
Lots of
every time.
J's.
Every time you
Yeah.
watch them, realize that they're using the rubric that Johnny Carson made and that is so ingrained in our culture, and that's why the impact. That's why it's important for you to have a book like this. And I mean, you and I could talk for hours about all the people that you've interviewed, and anyone from the gaffer to the boom mic guy to the curtain guy, like you said. But I want people to go read the book. I'm going to go pull it up again right here, but. It's just phenomenal. It's available right now. You can go buy it. This is on Penguin Random House. Love Johnny Carson, one obsessive fan's journey to find the genius behind the legend by my guest today, who's been very gracious with me for well over an hour here, and that is Mark Malkoff. And Mark, where can we get, other than just the book, but where can we get all things Mark Malkoff?
Oh, Tony, you're so nice to ask. I have a website, markmalkoff.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on all those social media things. And then I have a podcast called Inside Late Night for LateNighter.com. And LateNighter does late night news for the late night shows, past and present. And yeah, that podcast that I do called Inside Late Night, I've had people from Saturday Night Live and all the different late night shows. I just kind of have a knowledge of certain people of all the shows and wanted to talk about even though I love talking Carson, I just wanted to kind of open up, and I've done something like 50 some episodes of that, and it's been really great. I
Yeah,
know
you got
people
you got
really
all the
like
new people. By the way, Marcelo Hernandez. I should
yeah.
note that
Yeah.
I've known Marcelo a long time.
Oh
I've done
wow.
we did because I still do some stand up, but I did a
Yeah.
lot more stand up. And my favorite one of my interesting stories I remember hearing
Yeah.
was because Marcelo and I did a lot of open mics at taco joints on a Monday
Wow.
in front of apathetic
Sure.
audiences who are
Those are
already drunk.
brutal. They can be brutal.
Yeah, it's like a Margarita Monday, and by 10 o'clock, that's the last thing they want is to listen to, like, hey, I've got some stand-up. Let's do five
Yeah.
minutes tonight. And so Marcelo and I did a bunch of those gigs at that
Oh,
time.
great.
And I remembered being at our home comedy club, the Funny Stop in Cuyahoga
Uh,
Falls, Ohio, and he was opening for a comic named Matt Fultron, who's from
okay.
LA. He's worked with Sam Tripoli. He's worked with, I forgot who
Sure.
he was. I think he was Daniel Tosh's opener for a while.
Wow.
And Matt Fultron looks at him and says, "Why are you here?" And he's like, "Well, I'm going to college. I
Uh,
go to John Carroll University." He's like, You can't be here. It's like this town's dying. You're not gonna make it here. You
yeah.
have the look. You got to go to New York, go to Chicago." He's like, "Well, I'm from Miami." He's like, "Yeah, but you got to go to New York. You got to go to LA. You got to make it." And sure enough, just a few years later, he ends up getting on SNL, and he's
Mm.
arguably, for a lot of people, one of the more popular guys. He was in the
He's
Happy Gilmore 2. It's a
Yeah, he's done very well. Yeah, he's doing unbelievable. Yeah, there are a bunch of different podcasts on Late Night. I didn't get to talk to them yet, but the Saturday Night Livers, that's a separate thing. They were talking about him, but I had like from SNL, I had Robert Smigel was probably the Rachel Dratch. I'd have to think about some of the other SNLers, but yeah. So I had some fun people on, and it was talked to Janine Garofalo when she was a cast member on SNL. She was telling me that she
talked for a
didn't sign
couple
her
of minutes, I
contract.
think.
I know 7 shows she didn't sign her contract until Don Pardo was doing the credits. She was holding off on not. She wanted only to do a 1 year contract, and they wanted her to do like I forget how many years. So yeah, it was fun and interesting just hearing the stories about the late night. Um, yeah, late night, that whole genre.
That's yeah, I'll have to have you back on again. We'll
Oh,
just
I'd
talk
be
about
honored. Thank you
SNL.
so much. We can talk about Norm Macdonald, who I also talk about in the book. We texted back and forth, and his one of his dreams was to do Carson's show, and we talk about that and what happened and all of that. But yeah,
Because he was definitely he had that Letterman type. Like there was always, you
sure.
could tell in those days who was the type that you would find on
He
a
loved
certain
Dave. He
show.
worshipped Dave.
And yeah, and he
Um,
worshipped him, and that what and I played it in a podcast last week or
mhm,
recently of when he did David Letterman on SNL. And again, you want to
mhm,
talk about impressions that just like Dana Carvey's Johnny Carson, just like another previous guest I've had, Dave Thomas, who did Bob Hope. He loved
sure.
Bob Hope. It's not like he was trying to attack him, especially in the late, the 80s and the 90s and stuff. He loved Bob Hope and did all the mannerisms, did all the eras of Bob Hope. And so when Norm is doing David Letterman on SNL, he's not making fun of the guy. He's just doing all the mannerisms, the coughing, the let me move this doll of meat. And it's clearly, he's not hiding his voice. It's clearly Norm Macdonald doing David Letterman, but it's such a great impression because it's done out of love.
It is. I don't know how if Dave was into it. I have a feeling it probably wasn't his favorite thing to have that happen. But yeah, Norm worshipped Dave, and one of his dreams was to be one of the last comics to do Johnny's show. And but he was definitely like Norm used to tell me that Dave going on was such a big deal, whereas Conan he'd just be loose and just have fun. And it's not like I'm not gonna say he didn't care, but he just would not. It would go in with a completely different attitude. And I think that's why some of the best Conan will say to this day that Norm was maybe the best guest he had, because that looseness and the Bill Murray detachment. Murray talks about detaching and just being relaxed, and some of the best work will happen, and that people have a really tough time getting to that point there. But yeah, Norm, one of the best guests ever on late night shows.
MarkMalkoff.com. Go check him out. Go check out his podcasts. And of course, Love Johnny Carson is the name of the book. Mark, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this, doing this podcast. And again, yeah, I'd love to have you on back. Maybe if whenever Stephen Colbert leaves and whatever CBS decides to, I don't know, they're going to put more garbage on instead in that time slot. So maybe we'll reconvene and talk then
I'd like that.
whenever
Yeah,
they decide to do something next year in 2026. But
we
yeah, I
we
really do
shall see.
appreciate this.
Yeah, Tony, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for yeah, just asking me to do this, and we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience. I'll be back with you next week with another podcast. I think we're talking about, I don't remember. Maybe is it the breakfast cereal? I have so many. I've like banked episodes, so I'm trying to think of breakfast cereals or sitcoms or whatever else I have on the Check Your Brain podcast. That's the beauty of it, you know. Oh no, no, no! Next week I'm going to be talking about the 50th anniversary of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So I'm hoping to have a one of the sons of a survivor of one of the 29 men who perished on that. But yeah, we're coming upon the 50th anniversary. And yes, I will be, at the risk of having my channel demonetized, will be playing the Gordon Lightfoot wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald on the podcast, which Patton Oswalt has said is the best way to get people to leave a bar. If you're a bartender, you play that song, and everyone's like, "This is the most depressing song ever. Let's get our checks." So, yeah. So, thank you for listening to the Check Your Brain podcast. Thank you for watching it, and yeah, I'll be back with you next week. Bye, everybody.